Alright guys, welcome back to another video in the series of the ancient history of Bharat. Okay. Alright, I'll maintain the same position as my previous video that things are now getting interesting. Earlier it was largely based on, I would say, trying to form rational conclusion based on all the limited evidence that we have, and not that we have too much of it. Okay. So now, as in when we come closer to the current date, okay, right now we are still in the age of the Upanishads. Okay. And the second book in this series, that is written by RC Majumdar, this one. Okay. The second book is about the age of imperial unity. So they're also going to talk about some kings, some kingdoms. So that should be interesting for us to read. Right now we have reached the Upanishads. Okay. It is said that Upanishads are the culmination of the Aryan thought, culmination of the Aryanhood. Okay. So we'll today continue from page number 502. Yesterday we left off at that page, so today we are going to continue from that page onwards. So on that page, RC Majumdar writes, side by side with the high philosophy of the Upanishads, laying stress on knowledge and meditation as the means to the emancipation, we find a continuance of the old sacrificial rituals of the Brahmanas throughout the period under review. Okay, like I have said, the priestly class had managed to accumulate a lot of power into their hands. All right, and this naturally, okay, humans, we by nature are competitive and envious. Not exactly envious, but competitive. So all the other varnas, they were envious of the fact that how can the priestly class alone have such monopoly over sacrifices. Okay, so they came up with this idea that no, we do not need to conduct sacrifices. All right, you do not need to conduct sacrifices to please the god or be in good graces of the god. You simply just have to have true knowledge, and you can simply just do things, that resemble the sacrifice but not exactly conduct the sacrifice in letter and spirit. So in the Upanishads, you see that there was this widespread discontent amongst the mass of the populace because the priests, they were pretty few in number. Okay, and I would say they themselves are to blame for this because they had guarded this profession of being a priest very ferociously. I mean, if you wanted to be a priest during those times, you had to do a lot of penance and hard work for that. Okay, it wasn't that easy to become a priest during those days. But that is again, a lot of scholars amongst you, a lot of history students amongst you will say that I am speculating. So that's fine. I'll avoid that. I'll stick to what is written in this book. Okay. So yeah. So even though in the Upanishads people had moved away from the sacrificial way of the Aryans, they still they had not completely divorced themselves from their ancestral beliefs. Okay, but now what was the center of the faith? That was knowledge and not sacrifice. Okay, next up is the griya, or the domestic ritual, is so called because it centers around the domestic fire, or the fire which is established in the home and is maintained by the householder. Okay, like I said, one of the practices that the ancient Aryans practiced during those days was lighting up a fire in their place, and it was supposed to stay that way. You could never extinguish that fire. It was a perpetual fire. Okay, it kept constantly burning, rekindled ceremoniously by friction or borrowed from the house of a wealthy person. Okay, let's say for example, due to some circumstances, the fire that you had ignited in your house, and this is actual fire, I'm not talking metaphorically. Let's say for example, if the fire that you had ignited in your house because you were required to do so, it was impressed upon you, and this is how you expressed your Aryanhood. Okay, you would light up a fire in your house and it was a perpetual fire. There were ceremonies that were spread all across the year that were conducted to rekindle and reignite that fire. Okay, so let's say for example, due to some unforeseen circumstances or whatever reasons, that fire was extinguished. Okay, what was the remedy? The remedy for that was you could have borrowed that fire, but there were some conditions as well. Okay, largely that fire was borrowed from a wealthy person's house. Okay. The normal occasions for the establishment with proper ceremony of the domestic fire were marriage, the division of property of the family, and the other things. That was Samavartana, the return of student after the completion of his period of studentship. Okay, so these fires were renewed at these occasions, during these occasions. The employment of Brahman was optional, though he must be requisitioned at the Sulgava and the Dhanvantari sacrifices. There were again, up to this, even in the Upanishadic age, okay, there were some sacrifices that were deemed to be extremely sacred, and not a commoner could practice them without the proper guidance of the priests. All right. So even after coming very far away from their, ancient Aryan faith, okay, the Aryans, they still believed that there has to have some some element of the previous belief system, and hence we see that even to this very day there are certain things that you would have to call the priests for. Okay, you cannot completely neglect them. The marriage formulas were muttered by the bridegroom himself if he were a brahmana, otherwise the brahmana on his behalf. Okay, the priests, they would marry themselves, but if it were others, they were invited to chant the mantras. Further on that page, RC Majumdar writes, the human worshipper, realizing his weakness and utter helplessness, leans, as it were, for support on all powerful gods, a support which he seeks to canvass by the offering of gifts. Okay, this is something that I want to talk about in this video, and while I was reading this book, even I had to stop and contemplate on this as well. Okay, this idea that you are praying to God, okay, because you seek his or her support depending on the type of worship that you adhere to. Okay, so if you are worshipping a god, you are seeking something in return. Okay, so you're supposed to offer them gifts to please them, to get into their good graces, and hence they will grant you a wish in return. Okay, this is what it says on page number 504. The human worshipper, realizing his weakness and utter helplessness, leans, as it were, for support on the all-powerful gods, a support which he seeks to canvass by the offering of gifts. This is the essential nature of the Aryan sacrifice. This divine help and the power of magic were both invoked through sacrifice in the inevitable struggle with the forces of evil or the demons. Okay, now why exactly were sacrifices conducted? For this very reason, you had to make an offering of gift to a god to please them, and hence they will grant you something in return. Okay, now this paradigm was this is the paradigm that was overthrown during the Upanishadic age by the people who believed that no, we don't need to actually indulge in sacrifices, but you only need true knowledge. Okay, you cannot keep on conducting sacrifices and expect something in return from the gods. It's only through true knowledge that you can talk with the divine. It is rather the fear of death, the fear of great change that has affected them. This explains why the whole cult of dead in the Vedic ritual is marked by love and deep regard for the dead ancestors, and why providing nourishment for them is a matter that claims the respectful attention of all of the living all his life. Okay, so hence, like I said, it was feared, like whoever in your family lineage must have died, and you're supposed to worship them as gods. Okay, and there are also, even if in certain vernaculars, if you go, they'll say that, if they'll not say that somebody has died, they'll say that somebody has transformed into a god. Dev thai gaya chhe. That is how we say it in Gujarati, and also across many other vernaculars as well. Okay, we don't say that they have passed away or they have expired or they are dead. We use certain ways to speak these things. Okay, so whenever your ancestors die, you're supposed to feed them, worship them out of fear. Okay, that if indeed there might, you might be conducting something wrong, they would visit upon you with their wrath. Okay, One very important thing that I noticed was, and this is something that is misunderstood, like I say, I mean, I could be wrong about this, but this is how I understand our temples, okay, in the contemporary era. Temples were never meant to be places of worship. Okay, you don't go to a temple to worship. It's now that they have become places of worship, but the originally temples were places of learning. You go there to study the Vedas, you go there to study all the scriptures and everything else that we had. Okay, because why? Because the scriptures, the Vedas, they themselves are gods. Okay, if you read certain theories about the origin of the Vedas, you'll see that uh, you know all this all the theory and all the knowledge that we have in the Vedas, it's in a sense the Almighty, He Himself transformed into that knowledge or transformed him to Vedas. I know it's a little bit theosophical and philosophical, but this is how the Aryan philosophy functions. Okay, the Vedas themselves are gods. So yes, so a student of history might ask, that if indeed temples are very important for you, why don't we find mention of any temples all across the Rig Samhita? And this is a genuine question. I am not saying it's a. Someone might ask, a history student might logically ask, okay, if indeed temples were so important for you, why don't we find the mention of temples in the Rig Veda? Okay, the problem lies in your conception of the definition of temples. Okay, because the definition of temples has been extrapolated from the definition of church and mosque from the monotheistic traditions. Okay, that's not what it is. Okay, a temple was a place of learning, a place where you can go and study the Vedas. Remember, in many of our previous videos, we have talked about that there are 5 sacrifices that you're supposed to do every single day, and the 5th sacrifice was you have to devote some time to learning of the Vedas every single day. This was one of the sacrifice. Okay, so where would you go to do this sacrifice? To the temple. Hence we say you should go to the temple every day. So that was the definition of temple. Temples have always been places of learning, places of knowledge. They have never been places of worship. Okay. Right. Yes, here it is on page number 505. RC Majumdar, he himself raises the same question. Okay. Absence of any temple or house of God, even of the simplest kind, in the Rig Veda. This view may, however, be justly questioned. If by temple we understand a sacred place set apart for the purpose of worship and devotion to a deity, then there is this Griya Sutra, okay, that mentions Agniyara, okay, or a fire temple inside or outside which Bali oblations could be offered is such a temple, okay, place where sacrifices were conducted, okay, that was also supposed to be a sacred place, okay. So you do not need to look at these things from the dimensions, from the lenses of a monotheistic person, okay. For them, a temple or a place of worship simply is a place where you go and pray, okay, because they have embarked upon this adventure to define the Almighty. Hence they say that we only believe in one God, because they have defined that this is God, okay, there is nothing else, because they have defined it, and hence after having defined it, they needed a specific place to go and pray, okay. The truth is that though temples probably existed, they played no important part in the ritual of the sacrifice, the essence of which lay in an invocation of the god to come to the place of the sacrifice and to partake of the food and drink there kept ready for him. Okay. Now I agree that in the contemporary world, now temples have become a place of worship where the idols of gods are placed. Okay. But that does not mean it has always been like that. Okay. Agreed. A place of worship can have a deity. Okay. If you go to a place where you learn music, you'll see idols of Saraswati over there. Okay. If you go to a place where you practice Kalaripayattu, you'll see an idol of Parshuram over there. Okay. So this should tell you something. All these places were merely places of study. Okay. having an idol over there was simply this. Okay, you can also use this anecdote of Eklavya over there. Why did Eklavya erect a statue of Dronacharya? For inspiration. Okay, so if temples are having the idols of gods, they are merely there over there for inspiration. You have to go over there and study the Vedas. Okay. Next is the hymns of praise, the music, the dance can be understood as fitting reception for the god invited. Okay, why were there hymns of praise or music or dance? Why do our festivals have music and dance? Because if, let's say, if the gods decide to pay a visit to you while you are celebrating a festival, what would there be for his or her amusement? The music, the dance, and everything for that matter. Okay, other features such as chariot racing, dicing, archery, mimic fights, etc. can be explained as examples of employment of sympathetic examples of entertainment provided for the gods. Okay, let's say if the gods decide to pay a visit to you, okay, what can they have for their amusement? Okay, so you'll see that almost all our festivals have some component of music and dance. All right. Offerings are made in the hope of favors expected from the deity. The god accepts the offerings and becomes strengthened, and the prosperity of the sacrificer is in proportion to the prospering of the gods. Okay, so yes, it's a give and take relationship. Next up is, and you might have experienced this very frequently in your daily life as well. Okay, whenever you do something that your conscience, rejects, meaning, let's say, for example, you've done something that you should not have done in the first place, and you're having this pang there, you're having these pangs in your constant that in your conscience that why did I do this or why did I do that? Okay, so here is on page number 506, RC Majumdar writes something, and this could explain that dilemma. The purifying power of public confession and the usefulness of a warning to others of the identity of the sinner may be the elements of belief in some strange and peculiar practices connected with the removal of sin. Okay, so whenever you committed a sin, okay, what is the definition of sin? Anything that opposes or stops or hinders the functioning or the flow of cosmic order is a sin. Okay, for those of you out there who are looking for a definition of a sin is anything that hinders, impedes the flow of the cosmic order, that is dharma. Okay, it is an ever-flowing, a perpetual cycle of cosmic order, and if you try to hinder it, if you try to stop it, if you try to impede its flow, you will have committed a sin, and you will be paid visit by Varuna. Okay. The murderer drinks out of the skull of the murdered man, puts on the skin of a dog or an ass, and lives on arms confessing his guilt before all. Okay. So once that you had committed a crime, you're supposed to accept it in front of public. There has to be a public confession. The conception of sacramental communion is hinted at. Similarly, the idea of a common meal as means of producing harmony is clearly seen in the same sutra. Okay, yes. So one of the exercises to develop harmony amongst your brethren was supposed to be a common meal. Okay, a communion, when you get together and have a meal with each other. All right, this is what the Upanishads mention. All right, that's it for this episode of the ancient history of Bharat. That is all that I could read yesterday, and I will see you guys in the next video. Thank you for watching.